Welcome to another edition of the Yomi Layinka interview. Today I have a friend in the house. He's my friend. To all who know him, especially from his younger university days, he was called Malam. He was born and raised in Ibadan and started from Ibadan Grammar School and then went on to take graduate and postgraduate degrees at the University of Ife and then University of Toronto in Canada. He taught at the University of Ife until 1990. And until recently, he was the director of the Global African Program at the professor of philosophy at the University of Seattle in the US. He's an author of 3 books and several chapters in many other books, including his recent book, controversial one, which we will be discussing, titled Africa Must Be Modern. He recently joined the faculty of the prestigious Cornell University in the USA as a professor of African political thought. Welcome, Professor Femi Taiwo.
Thank you very much. Malam.
Oh. Malam, yes. Officially, Professor Femi Taiwo, but to me, Malam.
Thank you.
Let me start with this. What is Africana Studies, knowing that you've been engaged in that field for quite a while, and especially now that you recently joined the Cornell University?
You know, it's interesting because, you have African studies, then you have Black American studies, African American studies, Black studies, some people call it Africological studies. So some people came up with the idea that Africana captures, a much broader category of studies relating to Black people, especially in the diaspora. So, and it is to distinguish it from African studies, but you also have some people, let's say somebody like Lucius Outlaw, who is an African-American philosopher, who argues that Africana is actually an umbrella category, a kind of, reining in, putting together, gathering concept for all who study Black people, as opposed to different segments, of this. So that's pretty much, what Africana studies is.
So would Outlaw have preferred staying with the former categories, or does he support the idea of the merger?
An umbrella concept, Personally, the program that I just left at Seattle University, when we designed it, we called it Global African Studies because we wanted to capture all this, but at the same time, make very clear the fact that Africa has always been a global presence. Unfortunately, in the world's imagination, Africa is this place of all kinds of unspeakable things. And all too often, African scholars go along with that program. And we try to sort of move from that. So when we talk of Global African Studies, since we founded it in the US, we started with the US, the specific experience of peoples of African descent in the US, and then open outwards to the rest of the diaspora, and then work our way back to the mother continent itself. But we always wanted to be sure that if anyone was doing anything that had to do with peoples of African descent in any part of the world, our program will be a place that the person can come to. So over the years, we hosted people talking about Afro-Colombians, Brazilians, and I always look forward to, but we never managed to pull it off, to a celebration of Alexander Pushkin, the founder of modern Russian poetry, and literature, who, of course, somebody has actually written a book now tracing his father's origin to an area around Lake Chad in Nigeria.
Oh, really? I mean, that's new to me. Alexander Pushkin. Gannibal.
Yes, which was his name.
Yes. Now, I mean, how come he lost all of the pigmentation that would have made it clear that he's a Black man?
Actually, he didn't lose all the pigmentation, because when you look at his photographs and all that, the curly hair was still there. And it was just 2 steps removed, from his father. But of course, given that, what happens with genes as they become, mixed and so on and so forth, yeah.
Well, is it an accepted fact now? Because sometimes when, you know, I was with a few friends the other day, and we were joking about how when it suits the West, for instance, in England, they say something like, the black British has done it, won a gold medal at the Olympics. But when it's about, say, black British shooting somebody down, they say the black British of Nigerian parentage. Is it the case with Pushkin? Are they accepting of the fact that he has a black root?
As far as I don't read Russian, you know, so I can't tell you, but as far as I know, I don't think anyone has tried to deny that Pushkin had this background, or that he was a founder of, you know, modern Russian literature. And they have parks to him, they have, you know, monuments to him, which is not the same that we can say of, where's the monument of Fagunwa, for instance?
Well, we'll come to that, because that's also an issue of abiding interest, especially for you. Let me wander back a bit. I mean, you studied philosophy, you taught philosophy forever, and I found that you have kind of moved from basic philosophy to an abiding engagement with law, legalism, legal theory. Why has your scholarship tended to focus on legal issues or legal theory? Why do you find that interesting?
Well, actually, you know, what I've just done is to move for that area, a special area of philosophy called philosophy of law. Okay? And I happened upon that in graduate school because I'd always wondered, an abiding concern of mine till now, and you saw it in the manifesto, why is it that the institutions that we borrowed from elsewhere, why is it that they don't work for us the way they work in the places from where we borrowed them? Is this something about our soil, our water, our air? Or is this something that has more historical, you know, origins? So in graduate school, I was not able to do the work I really wanted to do because of the constraints of studying at a place where Africa was a non-presence. So I ended up writing a dissertation on Marxism and law, where I tried to rewrite the Marxist theory of law. But since then, my interest has been to do what I originally wanted to do, which is look at the career of law, the rule of law in Africa, and ask why the benefits of the rule of law are never redeemed for our people, especially after independence.
What did you find then? I mean, you posed the question, is it to do with our soil, is it to do with our genes, or is it to do with our lack of attentiveness to the imperatives of the law? What is different?
So in the book that was published 3 years ago on how colonialism preempted modernity in Africa, so part of what I did was to say that I started the book, the project, it wasn't a book. The project was to look at Nigeria, Kenya, and Tanzania and ask this question: why is it that the institutions of the modern state don't work for Africans the way they are supposed to work? And I was just going to write it up as case studies of these three countries. As I did the research, it became very clear to me that there's a more complex story to be told, and that I needed to go back to the colonial period, because a good part of what we are seeing now is really harvesting the bitter fruits, you know, of the sowings that were made, you know, under colonialism. But what then blew me away that eventually led to the book was that I found that, contrary to the lies that have been told, and which unfortunately many African scholars have bought into, the failure of those institutions has less to do with the nature of the African, has less to do with the African personality. It has more to do with historical abortions that took place under colonialism. Because before colonialism was formally imposed, there had been Africans working under the inspiration of Christianity, who wanted to redeem those institutions for Africa and remake Africa in the modern image. When colonialism came, they were checkmated. And what colonialism did was to say, you Africans, you want to fly before you've learned to walk. And in any case, you can't even walk, because you are by nature crippled. So that was the burden, that was placed. And every time colonialism had the opportunity of putting those institutions in place, it subverted them.
When you say subvert, obviously that means it was intentional.
It was intentional.
What was the aim then? To ensure that Africa never got on the train of modernity?
No, Africa was already on the train, especially in West Africa.
Yes.
But they then pushed us back.
Oh, really?
They pushed us back. I've made that case and nobody has challenged it yet.
Now, we're going to talk about that book specifically and your last book. But still on this, how colonialism aborted Africa's...
I'll give you one instance.
Okay, good. Exactly. That's what I wanted.
Lugard, at some point said he wanted to do the reform of the legal system in colonial Nigeria and created new courts. And part of what he did, and which people in southern Nigeria resisted, Professor Moni Adewoye has written about this, was to say that these courts, I think they were called provincial courts if my memory serves me correctly, lawyers would not be allowed to practice in them. How do you have courts from which you bar lawyers? And according to him and other civil servants in the British, whatever then, they said Africans do not have need of technicalities. Now, practice makes perfect. If you stop Africans from practicing these, rules, breaking them, repairing them, learning, the ins and outs, of all those rules, where are Africans supposed to get the experience of working them after independence? 2, colonialism was a regime of force. It was never a regime of law. So that's why all the sedition laws that Mugabe is now using in Zimbabwe, which our own people used to use here, post-independence, to put journalists in jail, were all put in place under colonial rule. And those laws were not in place in the countries that the colonizers came from. But because they decided that that is the level at which Africans ought to be, that's what they did.
So the founding philosophical approach to the legal system is what you're saying did not allow for these kinds of development. But what?
Oh no, it was the operation of the colonial system that did not allow Africans to have access to the founding philosophical systems of the legal system.
Oh.
And if you don't have that understanding, you are not likely to inculcate in the practitioners of the system the appropriate temperament that will make them, let me give you an instance. In our legal system, the police are supposed to read the caution to you when you are arrested, that you have a right to remain silent. It's in our law. It's part of our legal practice. When was the last time anybody read caution to any Nigerian who was arrested by any policeman?
I've never heard it. We see it in films.
That's it. But the reason is that people have not been brought up to think, and unlike the places where we borrow those systems from, in the United States, in Britain, people have been freed of murder charges because the police who took their statements did not read their warning to them.
Just because of that?
Absolutely.
Technical legality.
Because the modern legal system is a system of technicalities. If you are not apprised of the technicalities, you cannot operate it right.
Okay. The cynics, sympathizers to the West, will say, you've had freedom for 53 years in Nigeria, for instance. Yes. Have we not had enough time to reform these laws in the appropriate manner that then makes access to these technicalities much more easily?
The laws are not the problem, it's the intellectuals. Because you do need people who will explain this, who will teach this in school, who will bring up police officers, lawyers, bailiffs, court clerks, and all that, who are all imbued with this sense that this is what their operations require of them. We don't have those.
When you say intellectuals, I suppose like you, teachers and so forth, why will they also follow in the path of this subversion, as it were? Since it is in their national interest to change the trend from what it was when they didn't have the power. Now they have the powers. They are the lawyers, they are the professors, they are the attorney generals.
They don't have the education.
That's confusing. They have PhDs, they have
a PhD does not an educated person make. I got one, so. Okay.
Not many who have it will agree with you.
Oh no, but here's the deal. Take the idea that is at the center of the modern legal system. It's called the legal subject. Every time in our laws, in our constitution, everything, we want to protect the individual must not be, and all that. Do you want to guess how many papers, don't talk books, have ever been written on the notion of the legal subject in our laws?
Serious?
10 years ago, I made this claim, and one of my colleagues at Nnamdi Azikiwe University, he said, how can you say that? You know, have you checked out the literature? Do you know? I said, you know, fortunately, you and I are in philosophy. You need just one instance to falsify what I just said. I'm still waiting for him to bring that instance.
Are you serious?
Just do your research.
Now, I mean, if that is so central, as you say, to the idea, a notion of modern legal system, why would it not be so obvious to be the central theme of engagement anyway?
Because you do need to take the philosophical underpinnings of the system seriously. And that is exactly what the British legal system and British system of legal education does not do. Because the British system of legal education is a training in technique. It is not a training. All our law schools, how many classes in jurisprudence do our law students take? 1.
And jurisprudence is the philosophical branch of legal learning.
1.
But I know, for instance, I hope I'm right, that in the University of Lagos, there's actually a department of something called jurisprudence.
All the faculties of law have departments of jurisprudence. But what I'm saying to you is that it's not even jurisprudence, you know, because the jurisprudence that they take, there are very few serious legal theorists in Nigeria. I don't want to name names, but there are very few. You can practically count them, you know. I mean, yeah, there are very few.
Very few. This says to me, I mean, that we've inherited what you call the British penchant for technicalities of the law.
No, for technique.
For technique, rather.
Training, yeah.
For technique in legal training. What can be done or should be done urgently to reverse this? Because I am a bit alarmed at the fact that the central notion, as you claim, to the modern legal system is completely unattended to in these parts. And how can we then build on nothing? So what do you think can be done to reverse that culture?
It takes more than lawyers, because the culture was not constituted by lawyers. The culture was constituted by philosophers. And African philosophers have been AWOL. It was constituted by political theorists. And African political theorists have been AWOL. You are likely to find more engagement with these ideas in Awolowo than you find with most of our professors of political science. I'm making that claim to the public. It can be checked out. So,
let me connect all of these to the what you might call the thought processes of the modern African intellectual. And before that, you and I were speaking the other day about and it's in your book, Why Africa Must Become Modern. the notion that knowledge for its own sake has been, if not completely abandoned, is being abandoned for knowledge for application's sake. Do you want to speak about that before I then link it up to the whole historical concept of the university system?
You know, I made some examples in the book of a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry who won the Nobel Prize for something that piqued his curiosity as a kid. Why fish glow?
Yes.
Okay? And he pursued that all his life as an academic. Now, on the face of it, what reward is to be harvested from knowing why fish glow? And I record the example in the book of talking to my students at IFE several years ago about a researcher doing research into, fish psychology. And my students looked at me and they said, Malam, there you go again. Fish now, you eat fish. I said, that's part of the problem. Because our educational system has become so founded on quote-unquote problem solving. Our universities have become vocational institutions. It's not just in Nigeria, it's all across Africa. Meanwhile, what you need in research is to have an open field so that you actually cannot anticipate what is going to come at the end, and there's no proof that what is going to come at the end is going to be useful to anybody. But in societies where they realize the importance of the life of the mind, they just keep doing it. They give money for it because you cannot do serious academic work without leisure.
But some would say that can be understood by the fact that those societies have already conquered most of the challenges of nature.
Are doing it when they had not conquered. In fact, the reason they conquered these challenges of nature was that they paid attention to this all along. And other countries that are like us, India is now exploring space and sending rockets into space. Has India solved the problem of poverty in India? No. But India does not.
We also have a space program, I'm sure you know that.
Please.
No, I mean,
please.
We do. Whether it's the best is a different issue.
Please.
All right. But let me, as I said, tie this whole issue up to the founding concept of our educational system. I recall you, by the way, spoke about Lugard and how colonialism again, through Lugard, aborted the foundations of our educational system. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Lugard said when he came to Nigeria, and he wrote it, so I'm not making it up. So if people want to check it, go to dual mandate, in British tropical Africa, okay? And he said that British colonialism should not make the mistake they made in India, in Africa.
What did he mean?
He said in India, they gave Indians an education of the intellect, and that all it did was to create a group of Indian misfits who could no longer fit in their culture and who are just, aping British people. Now, he was wrong on that, because unlike in Africa, the British set out in India to create a group of Indo-Saxons. That's why they opened all their institutions to them. The British decided, they loved India so much, it's sickening. They decided that India must be modern whether it wanted to or not. And you go back and check the intellectual history, there is no single major British thinker of the 18th and 19th century who did not think that he had to say something about India as a matter of requirement. And what was the moniker they gave to India, in British colonialism? The jewel of the British crown. Okay? Now, that does not mean that colonialism did not wreak havoc with India. So let's put that aside. So they came here. First, they denied that Africans were human. That's the beginning of the problem. So all those Africans that had begun to embrace modernity were immediately declared as psychological cases, as crazy people, you know, who were trying to shed their own skin. Okay? And then in education, he said, so in Africa, one, because we are not human, and even if we are human, he says we are natural prevaricators. His word exactly.
That's Lugard's word.
Lugard's word.
Natural, that Africans are natural
Prevaricators, exactly. So that's why he said, in Africa, what Africans need first, second, and last is character education. So that's why religious studies became a subject in our curriculum.
To make us human?
Exactly.
Since we were subhuman anyway.
So that's why science, law, philosophy were not part of the curriculum. That's why there was such a resistance, in spite of African agitation, to setting up a university here, you know, in Africa. Okay? Now, see how well Lugard has done. All our universities now, including state-owned ones, think that the only way you impart morality is through religion. Welcome to Lugard world.
So it was a setup.
It was deliberate. And we have now bought into it without any kind of critical sense.
That's where we're going to be breaking today. And I'll come back and continue this conversation with Professor Femi Taiwo. Thank you for watching. We'll be back again. Looking backwards, historically, from the Grecian times, I suppose, what was the original concept of the university system when man, or modern man, decided to invent the university system? What purpose was it to serve?